So this is the Church Post Sunday School, How to Be Intergenerational. And I'm Wendy Claire Barrie, and I'm really happy you came. I'm responsible for the children and family ministries at Trinity Church, Wall Street, which is where Alexander Hamilton is buried. That's what we're most famous for right now. It's also where the national treasure is buried, in the crypt. And most recently, it is where Peter Parker is buried, if you've seen Into the Spider-Verse. So now we have children coming to look to see where Spider-Man is buried. It is a really interesting place to be because it is in the financial district on Wall Street. And until about, in the last, post 9/11, that neighborhood has really dramatically changed. All of a sudden, our church is full of young families who live down there. Now, my father went to stockbroking school in New York City back in the 60s. And in fact, in the 1970s, Trinity actually made a home for a congregation in Brooklyn that needed a place because they had plenty of people attending weekday services, but very few people, whoever were there on Sundays. So we have a core group of congregants who have been worshiping with us and raised their families there, now are raising grandchildren there, adult grandchildren now, who are part of our community, as well as this vibrant group of young families, most of whom come within walking distance. Come forward, I have pocket crosses. This is my 31st year of doing children and family ministry in the Episcopal Church. This is my 7th congregation. It is crazy for me to be standing here telling you that. It is really, really wild. It's also a lot of fun, and I feel like I should put down these crosses now. You might need something to fidget with, Missy.
Just a side note.
Yes.
St. Paul, Salt Lake City was founded by 2 women from your parish.
How cool is that?
The Mount Sisters.
Oh, how interesting. I'll have to go back and tell that story. Yeah, Trinity's been home to many places. His many churches have sprung up in Trinity's wake. So it's an interesting context in which to be thinking about intergenerational ministry. It's something that we have jumped into the deep end on, in part because of the opportunity provided to us. But for me, my particular passion has been the full incorporation of children and youth into the life of the parish for about as long as I can remember, because guess what? I was that kid. I grew up at St. Mary's Church in Laguna Beach, California, and it was an extraordinary place. I didn't know it at the time. I thought, until I was in my late teens, I thought every church had gay and lesbian families. I thought every church, you came to church in your shorts and in sandals, and there was also incense and sanctus bells. I just assumed that everyone sang both Mozart and Godspell on any given Sunday. I started getting paid to work in the church nursery when I was 10. I made 50 cents an hour. The church nursery was in the rectory, which was on the property of the church. And by the time I was 14, I was teaching Sunday school, and I was also the youngest member of the church's Christian Education Committee, which met after church on Sunday, which made it very convenient for me to attend meetings. And the other thing that happened when I was 14 was that my parents separated. And for a period of a few months, my mother stopped going to church. And I got on the bus and I went by myself because I thought they couldn't have church without me. Wow. I was really fully incorporated into the life of the church. I sang in the choir. I had an amazing time. And I am one of those weird people who has never had a time away from the church. And that might be why. I have always been able to find my place in it. So that is where my own passion comes from. I wrote a book a few years ago called Faith at Home, a handbook for cautiously Christian parents. That was sparked by some really interesting research that I had not previously been aware of. I heard the sociologist Christian Smith deliver the Ensign Lecture at Yale University at the Divinity School there. And what he had to say in about 45 minutes really struck me hard. He was reporting from the conclusions drawn from the fourth wave of data in the National Study of Youth and Religion, a longitudinal study of more than 3,000 youth, which we began in 2001. So this was 2014. He'd been at this a while. He said unequivocally that the single greatest influence in the spiritual and religious life of American teenagers is their parents. That was hard for some of those people at Yale Divinity School to hear. Probably other places too. So not clergy, not youth ministers. And that home is where faith is passed on, not church, not camp, not mission trips. And that preaching programs and rites of passage are also not key to this faith formation. It's ordinary life practices, really simple things that we can teach and share. The statistics he gave were really startling. 82% of children whose parents were active in their congregations, who practiced their faith and who talked about matters of faith, did become religiously active as young adults. Only 1% of older teens whose parents placed little emphasis on religion were religiously active as young adults. So that was the first. Who was that? That's Christian Smith, the National Study of Youth and Religion. There is online, you'll find a resource page that's got lots of articles that reference him and his work. You can obviously buy his books as well. That's a lot of what he has to say about intergenerationality is inferred from the data. It wasn't something that he was looking directly at. But what is obvious, of course, is that for all of us who work in the church, there's a problem there's a disconnect between what parents think their role is and what their actual role is. And part of it is because influential cultural scripts, this is a Christian Smith quote, influential cultural scripts disempower parents by telling them to turn their children over to the experts, to us. And many religious parents operate on the model that someone else is responsible for forming their children religiously. So, part of our job now is to educate and support parents in their role as their children's primary pastors. And one of the reasons that parents and teenagers struggle in articulating their faith is that we don't do that well ourselves. The adults in our congregation don't know how to tell their faith stories. And we, the paid staff, the lead volunteers, also have not been equipping them with these tools. So, in order to speak a religious language, we have to be fluent in it, which requires practice. And the best way to practice that is, of course, in a congregation. Now, two other interesting data points came up when I was doing this research that really spoke to me about our role in talking about who we are as the people of God, what we believe, who God is, what God is, why it matters to us. The other most indicative factors of kids growing into an adult faith is not participation in Sunday school or youth group. It is participation in worship, active participation in worship, and connection to other adults in the faith community. So the good news is we have other adults in the faith community and we have worship. So we just need to bring those things together with getting people to talk about their faith and to share their practices of faith and to introduce them to practices of faith that they can take home easily, right? And we've already got that. So I frankly think small churches have a huge advantage that they don't even understand. They're already doing this because they have to. They don't have the staff or the volunteers to be able to age segregate. This is something that we've been doing for at least 50 years now. There's actually quite a bit of evidence over this long period of time, 40 years now, showing how that did not serve us well across denominations. And primarily, it's because we mimicked what was happening in the culture. Kids go off to these, their specialized age-segregated schools and do their specialized age-segregated activities, and we mimicked that in the church. And even with the adults, we've got the young adults, and we've got the seniors. At our church, they're called the New Beginnings group, and we've got the parents group, and we've got this group and that group, and we're not bringing everyone together. Very rarely do we bring people together. It is a puzzle that we can absolutely solve. Now, there's a new book here called The Generative Church, Global Conversations About Investing in Emerging Congregations. It's edited by Corey Seibel. This work is being done internationally, this research into intergenerational ministry, and it actually has a lot to offer us. I wanted to tell you really quickly, and then I'm going to stop looking at my notes and just chat with you. One of the chapters in this book is by Joseph Azzopardi, and you don't have to write that down. I'll give it to you later. And Cale DeWall, they're both working in Australia, although Joseph's from Canada originally. The Anglican Church in Canada, in Australia, New Zealand, and in the UK is doing this intergenerational work and research far more and for far longer than we've been doing it here in the U.S. But they have a chapter in this book which outlines 5 factors in intergenerational communities. Number 1, positive interactions. Number 2, connectedness. Number 3, interdependence, empowerment and accommodation. And what they have to say about empowerment and accommodation is that while the other 3 are necessary for any community, empowerment and accommodation are necessary in Christian community because they're about inclusivity. So I thought this was really interesting. So it's not only bringing people together. First of all, they actually have to talk. They have to get to know each other. And they have to reach across those differences of age or gender or class or however we've grouped ourselves at coffee hour, which happens all the time. And that once there are these 5 pieces in place, this is how Christian disciples are formed. So connectedness starts first, and it's easy to see how we can make that happen. I hope. We'll brainstorm about that. Interdependence, I thought, was a really interesting one. Positive interaction is connectedness are 2 of a piece, but interdependence means that once those 2 have been established, people are actually seeing the need for one another. We're not whole without you, so I'm really interested in what you think. I'm really interested in what's going on in your life. We need each other to do the work of God in the world. So, breaking down the silos, I think, is just an essential next step there. Empowerment and accommodation. Well, so that speaks to me, and in my role in my church growing up, I was empowered to take on responsibilities and roles outside what would ordinarily be given a child at a larger church, I think. Yes, there was a paid nursery superintendent. Her name was Gigi. I thought she was God when I was really little. You go to church and the people who love you, that's God, right? But she also really wanted us to make sure that we knew we were sharing in that work of communicating God's love. So that's why I had a paid responsibility to come in on Sunday mornings and give God's love to those little ones. My priest, Brad Corellius and Barbara Mudge, who had my job in our church, also gave me those roles and responsibilities, gave me a Sunday school class to teach when I was 14 years old, invited me to serve on the Christian Education Committee. They empowered me. So let's think really creatively as we go through this about how we can empower the people in our midst. And accommodation. Accommodation is also really important because it speaks to the way that we behave together. It speaks to what won't happen in intergenerational communities, some things we have to do on our own with our own age groups. It also speaks to the different needs of different generations is certainly a part of that. It also speaks to the fact that we can't all get what we want all the time. We have to give a little in order to benefit the most. I have some fabulous slides, if I can figure out how to share them. I want to talk first about worship, and I'm going to ask you to think about worship in your own context or worship that you've seen. I think this is a good place to start. I've broken it down into 3 areas for us to talk about today. Worship, education, and everything else. Oh, there we go. So this is St. Paul's Chapel, which is the oldest building in continuous use in Lower Manhattan, in all of New York City. It was built in 1766. It's where George Washington worshiped on his inauguration day. It's also where the recovery workers after 9/11 were given 24-hour respite care for about 9 months. And it is home to our family Eucharist at 9:15. I think most of my worship slides are from St. Paul's. Our service began there about 5.5 years ago. And it started because we had built a robust Sunday school. I wasn't there yet. I've been there almost 5 years. But Trinity had built a robust Sunday school and discovered that those new families attending were not going to the 11:15 worship service or even the 9 o'clock worship service at Trinity Church. They weren't going. They had no interest. It did not speak to them. And so for about a year, staff and congregants very intentionally planned what became a 45-minute family Eucharist on Sunday mornings, which now has about 250 people attending during the program year. As I mentioned, we're home to a lot of families now. This is not because Trinity has resources. It certainly does, but we don't advertise this service. We put out some photographs on the fence outside that shows what happens inside. And this service has spread word of mouth. We don't have, certainly we have the clergy to support it, but we don't have a lot that needs to happen. We have the benefit of flexible space, and we have a lot of intentionality. So as you can see, every Sunday we have crucifers, sometimes several. The cross is heavier than it needs to be, but it's an Ethiopian cross, and so the ribbons are a big hit. And that means also that older people need to help carry the cross sometimes if it's a younger person, which is quite lovely. We give those jobs away right at the beginning of the service, just before it starts. It starts at 9:15, so people are wandering in. Actually, people are wandering in for quite a while. It's a family service. But the people who come early know that they will get a job. And so that's been very enticing. We select the readers, the greeters, the children to bring up the offering, all right there at the beginning of the service. So we have offering baskets that are light and deep, and so children as young as 2 can carry them. We have as many as 8 children who will bring forward the offering on any given Sunday. That's about what we have room for in front of the altar. But it is, as you can see, a very important job. We have a carpet in the middle of our space that we put down on Sunday mornings, and it is where people sit very often for the sermon. It is also where children dance and crawl. Some priests will sit right down on the floor with them. Mark Bazzuti Jones always walks back and forth and a couple of weeks ago, it was his turn to preach after not having been, he'd been traveling, and he took his place as he does, wandering back and forth. He really likes to move, so generally he doesn't invite the children forward because he'll step on them. But because he hadn't been there in a while, the children rushed up to the carpet because they know they belong there. And so he worked around that. But it's always about an 8-minute homily, and all our clergy rotate through. The 8 minutes has come trial and error. We have several priests who are not American-born, and they have their tendency is to preach longer because that's their cultural ideal and preference. It really doesn't work very well in this context, but we also have another service. So if people want to listen to a longer, more traditional sermon, they have the option of listening to that online. I know that doesn't work in every context, but that's been a great benefit for us, and it's really kept the clergy inclusive of the children. Not all of them preach to the children. They find a way to include them. And the children gather around the altar for the Eucharistic prayer. You can see how close they get. Winnie Varghese, one of our priests, breaks the priest's host, and hands out the triangles for the children to lift high in the air. And for some reason, that always brings tears to my eyes. This is Kristen Miles, who frequently passes out the chalice, the paten, the cruet, whatever she has. She gives away. This is how close the children come, even behind the altar, to see what's going on and to take part in the words. Of course, children can also preach. You recognize this child. I hear you giggle. This is my child, who's now almost 17, and when you see him, if you see him, he's got very long red hair now. But this is Peter at Lessons and Carols at St. Bart's in New York City, where it's the tradition for the youngest chorister to read the King James translation of the temptation and fall, right? If you've ever listened to the Lessons and Carols from King's College, Cambridge, that's the way it's done, and St. Bart's does that. But because at this age he read so well, he was the first child ever to read at the Easter Vigil the following year. He got to read Ezekiel in the Valley of Dry Bones. And guess what? Kids are excellent readers, a lot of them. And it was literally the first time that anyone under the age of 60 had read at that service. I kid you not. That was not a figurative statement. So someone listened, someone paid attention, someone invited him in and gave him a responsibility that he has now frequently enjoyed, reading in church. So our children participate in a variety of ways. At the end of the service, they even roll up the rug. For a while, we have been sharing the space, the last 19 months, we've been sharing the space with the 1115 congregation at Trinity Church, 5 blocks away, because Trinity closed for renovation and reopened on Christmas Eve. So that was really exciting for us because since the 915 began, it has always been in this separate space. And there were a number of our elders who were utterly convinced that it wasn't real church. And that was painful for us to hear. We knew something special was going on here. We knew that children and families and, frankly, adults of all ages who chose to come to this service were choosing it for a reason. There had been, I think, a feeling that people would graduate to the 1115 service. Guess what? That did not happen. But when our 1115 and our 915 communities overlapped in the same space, we were able to start building relationships. I'll talk more about that when we get to education. But we needed to transform the space after this service every week. We rented space across the street in the New York County Lawyers Association for 45 minutes of Sunday school. You'll see some unfortunate photographs of that space. Lots of white men in suits, oil paintings of white men in suits on the walls of the New York County Lawyers Association. It's not shocking, right? Lots of boardroom tables. Not the ideal circumstance, but it was right across the street, and we were able to have Sunday school. 14 VC was closed. At the end of December, it's been sold. I was able to say goodbye. Our new building is not quite ready for the congregation, so we're actually having our education hour right there at St. Paul's now that Trinity has reopened, which has been a great gift to us. We have a Christmas pageant, as many people do, and it is not entirely intergenerational, although you'll see the Holy Family is, in fact, a family, an actual family. The very best Christmas pageant I ever did, for which I was blasted in the Living Church because I wrote about our seminarian and her husband being a camel, and they hid a squirt bottle underneath and squirted people going down the aisle. The Living Church took a great exception to that. I'm so sorry. The greatest Christmas pageant I ever did was at Church of the Epiphany on the Upper East Side, which was a small congregation, my home for almost 14 years where my son was baptized. Because it was small, we could only have a Christmas pageant if the adults got involved. And so the senior warden was Herod. And, his advisors were vestry men and women, which was really fabulous. And the angel Gabriel came down the aisle on rollerblades. But Trinity has, a lovely children's pageant, and they're the angels, some of the angels. And I think when the Christmas story is only told by very young children, the unspoken message is the Christmas story is only for very young children. So, because Trinity has another service on Christmas Eve for families, I was able to commission some fabulous puppets that are large enough that adults and teenagers are needed to operate them. They are really quite magical. I think if you have not met them in person, you might think they are scary, but no one leaves screaming. That's not the next picture of the Christmas. I think maybe there's another picture of the puppets. It has been a really wonderful gift to have another way of telling the story that incorporates a variety of ages. So this is the blessing of the backpacks, which is another liturgical moment every year. Many years ago now, I wrote a backpack blessing that made its way through the Episcopal Church because church publishing gave it out on a little memory stick for a general convention one year. What you can't see in this photograph are all the adults who are standing there with their satchels and their briefcases and their book bags. This has become a really big thing to invite the adults forward for these opportunities as well. 2 years ago, we gave out the pocket crosses. They were extraordinarily popular. I now have to keep extra because people will come by asking for one to give to a friend. This was 2 years ago now. These I purchased on Amazon very inexpensively. They're olive wood. They're from Jerusalem. I was really pleased with the bargain, but also really pleased that it meant so much to people. I think there are all kinds of things that we might assume are for our children. And if we don't tell our adults that, they will feel included too. We've also started talking very intentionally about households rather than families, because people can see themselves as a household if they don't have children at home or if they are a single person at home. And no matter what age they are, they recognize themselves in that invitation. I am having a little bit of trouble forwarding to the next slide. Any ideas? I don't know.
Would you like us to act it out?
Any? Okay. I can advance it that way.
Do you want to just wave at me?
Yeah, you bet. Yay. Okay. So that's Daniel Simon's We also have a lot of creativity and freedom at our retreat center in creating liturgies that are very intergenerational. Daniel just left to go to a new church, and so these are the families who were at the New Year's retreat gathered around to bless him and his husband Javier and send them on their way. But this is something that they have seen and been a part of at both Trinity and St. Paul's for a very, very long time. When Daniel and I plan liturgies, we use paperless music. And are any of you familiar with paperless music? Music Makes Community? Yes. We use exclusively paperless music at the retreat center.
That's just, I don't know that.
So let's try it. Let's try it. So this is a really simple song that we sing all the time at the retreat center. The words are this: God welcomes all. God welcomes all. Strangers and friends.
Strangers and friends.
God's love is strong.
God's love is strong.
And it never ends.
And it never ends.
God welcomes all, strangers and friends. God's love is strong and it never ends. God welcomes all, strangers and friends. God's love is strong and it never ends. God welcomes all, strangers and friends. God's love is strong and it never ends. One more time. God welcomes all, strangers and friends. God's love is strong and it never ends. See, you did it. Music That Makes Community teaches lots of workshops and classes and has practice sessions all over the country. They have a website, which is on the resource list, and they have teaching videos. St. Lydia's, which is where I met Daniel first, is a dinner church in Brooklyn that uses all paperless music. They have teaching videos as well. There's a link to that. It is just a really wonderful thing when the music that you share is taught in the moment each time, so that no matter whether you know the music or not, you can sing it, and you can sing it strongly and beautifully. And there's quite a variety of music for lots of occasions. There was paperless music at my wedding. I happened to meet my husband at St. Lydia's, the dinner church in Brooklyn. Emily Scott, who is the founding pastor there, is here, and she and I will be doing a workshop, not this workshop, but a workshop that has some relation to it on Friday, the last session of the day. But Daniel actually and Javier, St. Lydia's started in their living room. As an Advent series. And so the practice of dinner church, of course, has the entire Eucharist in the context of a meal. And my son and I found ourselves there one Sunday when Donald Shell was preaching, a friend and mentor of mine of many years. And when I first told Peter that we were going to do this and go to St. Lydia's, he'd already been in church for 6 hours. He's a chorister. You saw a picture of him. He'd already been singing for 3 of those 6 hours. And so I made all these excuses. I said, I'll pack some food. It's a vegetarian meal. I didn't know what he would eat. You can bring a book, It's only this one time. Well, as soon as we walked in the door, Peter was the only child there. They had him start setting the table. They had him chop some vegetables for the salad. Donald said, "Peter, would you like to narrate the gospel?" Peter was all over that. When it came time for the sermon, Emily asked for the congregation to respond with stories of their own. And Donald had been preaching about the death of his father. Well, Peter, my son's father, died when Peter was 14 months old. And so Peter was able to say to Donald, I have an idea of what this was like for you, because you had your dad for so many years and so many memories of him. And I don't even remember my dad, but I miss him. He'd never been invited to respond to a sermon before. I mean, it was just really powerful. So it was halfway through the service when he said to me, can we go back to St. Lydia's even when Donald isn't preaching? My husband, Phil, was there that first night. He was the person who invited Peter over to chop some vegetables. It took us 2 years to figure out that we should maybe go out, but we went out just a couple of times before we realized that we'd probably get married. And we've been married almost 5 years, 5 years in May. So that this method of paperless music is near and dear to us. We've all led it and taught it, and we incorporated it in our wedding as well. The final hymn at St. Lydia's is a hymn that's sung in parts from printed piece of paper, which you might need to share depending on how many people show up for dinner. But it's very relational, it's very inviting, and it establishes community really quickly among people of varying abilities and ages. So I think that's quite lovely. We have an 11:15 service at Trinity Church, which is very much not like the joyful chaos of the 9:15 at St. Paul's Chapel. It is beautiful. The architecture is Gothic. It has stunning stained glass windows. There are clouds of incense. We are really working on making it a little more family friendly. We have children's chapel during the adult sermon, where the children process after the gospel procession and right behind them, and go off for basically about 20 minutes. The sermon and the prayers are what we miss. So we have our own interactive, lively homily, and we also have some songs and some prayers. We come back at the peace. If there's a baptism, we're always back for the baptism. We have worship bags that are available. We have a variety of things inside them. We have a child's guide to the Eucharist. We have a soft woolly lamb if you're tiny. We have a finger labyrinth if you're older. We have some interesting picture books related to the season or the day. They are labeled, please return to Trinity Church, Wall Street, because the idea is that people will not walk home with them. However, that does happen once in a while. But it's worth it. It's worth it because it's a long service. It's an hour and 15 minutes. Now, our choir master and director of music, Julian Walkner, has now 2 children, and we've just moved back into Trinity Church. I wish I'd thought to include this picture. There's a fabulous picture on Julian's Facebook page of him holding Tabitha strapped to his chest while he's playing the piano. We don't have our organs installed yet. And so I think it will, in fact, become more family-friendly in part because Julian now is a father himself. We do have a nursery. Right now it is in the church temporarily, but we have a new building for program space that is about to open in the next month or so, and people will be invited to take their children across the bridge to a very beautiful nursery setting. The nursery is not open during the 9:15 service. So that will happen. The 9:15 service is moving to our hall. It is a beautiful space. I was really worried. St. Paul's is so special. You saw how much light there is at St. Paul's. It is holy ground with all the history there. Our families will be very reluctant to leave it, but it's 5 blocks away from where we want them to gather together and stay and go to class. If we have both the opportunity for people to gather in groups and gather for coffee hour and godly play and a variety of activities for a variety of ages and contexts. So the whole service actually has to move to the beautiful parish hall that overlooks Trinity Church, by the way, with double height plate glass windows, so that'll be, I hope, an enticement. We'll have a leave taking when that happens. It's necessary. We'll see how it works. Maybe we will return to St. Paul's for our festival days, I'm hoping. That hasn't been determined yet. Missy, I'm going to need you to pull up the next slide. So this is whole community learning, but I would rather stop now and talk about worship in your context. Yes, please ask a question, and please also,
I don't need
is
that,
this on?
really.
Okay, well, it's being recorded, so that's kind of why they wanted us to use it, but it does not appear to
I
be
just
on.
want you to explain a finger
Here we go.
labyrinth.
Oh,
What's a finger labyrinth?
So a finger labyrinth is a labyrinth that's printed on a card or printed. Ours are printed on a block of wood. I have one that's stitched in cloth, and it's a labyrinth that you trace with your finger, or a stylus. You can use a stylus, but
That's
a child
what I
can
figured, but I wanted to
it's
know,
just lovely and meditative and very easy to put in a bag that's going into your pew with you.
And what else besides the stuffed lamb?
Wiki sticks. Do you know about wiki sticks?
No, tell me.
So here we go. Wiki sticks are wax-coated sticks that can be. Actually, they're great for decorating candles, but you can also use them just to model things. It's not like modeling clay, so bits won't come off it. Modeling wax is good, but it takes a long time to warm that up in your hands. So wiki sticks are good for even little ones. You can get them actually in party packs, so that you can stick an individual pack in the bag, and the kids can take those home. We use worship bulletins. We use both Gretchen Wolfe Pritchard's Sunday paper and the ones from Illustrated Children's Ministry. I like both of those very much. And different ones appeal to different ages, so that's helpful.
Who puts out Illustrated?
Illustrated Ministry, he has a booth here, and you'll also find that information on the resource page. And it's Adam Walker Cleveland, one of those. He has 3 names. Those are all 3 of them. I'm just not remembering the order. So questions about worship, stories about worship, ways in which you have made worship inclusive and intergenerational.
So here's I guess half story, half question. So we have a Worship Together program that's worship for preschoolers and their family. It's kind of low church because the altar's so low. And it's takes about 45 minutes, but it's very much preschool focused. So while we have families, the youngest are preschoolers, often the oldest kids might be 2nd or 3rd grade, or a little older, and we have parents. The way we do it is that we kind of we don't do the lections, we kind of launch right into a interactive story that sort of riffs on the gospel or one of the things. It's very short songs, very sweet. The thing is, I have a couple of questions around that, and that is, it does feel like the kind of liturgy that people need to graduate from. And I've been wondering how to make that a liturgy that pulls in families and meets people at higher levels, because parents sometimes really like a preschool liturgy because it doesn't demand much of them. And we don't end up developing some of the more difficult things that we need to talk about as church. So you end up with this siloed group that really like that comfortable place, and their kids are happy, and they don't know how to transition to something else, and we don't know how to enrich, or we need to think about how to enrich that liturgy. And my other question is, how do you do that and sort of education in, our families tell us they can give us maybe an hour and a half total. And so liturgy and whatever follows is all that they can really manage as far as coming back to programs. They're not managing that either. So how do we think about something that both is worshipful and catechetical in an hour and a half? There you go. A lot of questions.
No, that's good. Am I being heard by this? So I don't need this. Great. Okay, so I think that's a really interesting point. There are some wonderful children's liturgies. Ours is not that. We were really intentional about that. We have one reading and the gospel, and a lot of beautiful music, strongly led mostly by the children's choirs. We have children who sing ages 4 through 18 and in various configurations. Once a month, it's the chapel choir, which is adults, and they're lovely. They're just not kids. And during the summer, we have at least a quartet of paid professionals. But the music is always, all year long, really intentional, so that we are singing the same music for a season. We are singing hymns that are both beautiful and have good theology. We are singing a lot of spirituals and music from other traditions, because the hymnody that is just not what these families who are new to church, the families that are our 9:15 service are primarily people who are new to church altogether, because guess what? They're from a generation where their parents didn't take them to church. They're new to the Episcopal Church. They're new to this more expansive and inclusive vision of Christianity. And so the 11:15, or a very traditional Rite to Eucharist, would feel strange to them. It's not where they are. Some people obviously are drawn to that, but this was a very intentional choice. It is very, particularly right now, because of the priest who now is overseeing liturgy, it is very much recognizably a Rite to liturgy. Previously, we've used other Eucharistic prayers, which I really love, from the Church of England and from other places. There's some wonderful resources for short Eucharistic prayers that really invite the children into it, both either with a response or with language that's really accessible and clear to them, without being a children's liturgy, per se. I will come to Scott. For the prayers of the people, we found that having a repeated refrain or a sung refrain is really important, because we have so many non-readers. If you're using prayers of the people that don't allow children to respond who can't read, it's really uncomfortable. So those are the ways that we've made it 45 minutes long. Only one or two verses of a song, really intentional about the music, the one lesson, the prayers. We've used a variety of translations over the 6 years. I have with me Lynn Zilbrig's children's lectionary, God's Word, My Voice, which we used for a long time. We've used the Message. We've used the Common English Bible. I'm holding a microphone, so I think I have to talk into it. And so that's helped too, and it's helped reach the adults who need to hear it in a way that's different from the way it is read more formally. We do have a gospel procession. I would love for us to experiment with the way we tell the stories. We're not there yet. We do that all the time at the retreat center. That's what's so lovely about having an experimental context to try things. And then, people become more comfortable with it, and other clergy become more comfortable with it, which is part of the deal, right? Is you have to bring them along too. So, see what happens when we are able to tell the story this way. People hear it in an entirely different way. So that's exciting. We're going to talk more about the catechetical piece, because we do the same thing. We have 45 minutes of worship and 45 minutes of education right afterwards, and we'll get there. But more questions or suggestions or ideas about worship?
Hi, my name is Scott Stoner, and I want to give an eyewitness account to this 9:15 service at Trinity Wall Street. Wendy brought our Living Compass ministry. They already did a program there a couple years ago, and my wife and I came to this service. She told us about it, and I just want to share this. I don't know if I came in a few minutes late. I don't know if you said this. So the service is at 9:15. We got there at 9, and we walked into the church, and the whole back of the church is set up with coffee and donuts. I don't know if you still do that every week. Okay. So I turned to my wife, Holly. I said, because we're time changed. I said, we got here at the wrong time. They're having coffee hour. And I think I saw Wendy said, no, church is in 15 minutes. So they start with coffee and donuts are out in the back of the church before church. And what that meant for us, we don't know a soul in this place. We're visiting. We visit different churches almost every Sunday. So we started meeting all these people before church even started. We probably met 15 people who welcomed us. One family invited us to come and sit with them during the service and kind of like be their guests. And so this sense of community was already being formed. I don't know if you ever called it, but it almost feels like breakfast church to me.
It is.
Because and then the coffee hour is set up, and the donuts and coffee are available throughout the whole service. And so if you get restless and you just want to stand up, you can go back and get a cup of coffee. And I got to tell you, I've told so many people about this service, and they go, coffee and donuts in the church service? It's like, that's the first. But And the other thing I just want to say too, I've never experienced the Eucharist that is so immediately accessible to complete outsiders, unchurched people, and is so deeply Episcopal and so beautifully and reverently done. It's true. Truly,
I didn't pay him to be
truly.
here.
I tell everybody about this service wherever I go. It is the real deal. And the one thing I do want to say too, when I tell people, say, "Oh, well, that's Trinity Wall Street. They can do anything because they got money." This has nothing to do. You need money to buy the donuts and coffee. Okay, this has nothing to do with money. It has nothing to do. Yes, it's a beautiful historical space, but it's this interior spiritual center space in the hearts of the people that are running it. That are creating that space. So I just want to give
Thank
that
you
eyewitness
so
account.
much.
I'm not a plant.
Thank you.
She didn't know I was going to be here.
So the coffee and donuts, that's a real thing, because guess what? In order to get families there, sometimes you need to feed them. And to be welcoming, and because, hello, it's church, it's yes, it is a beautiful space, and yes, we have a floor that can be swept. It's that's certainly true. But it's church, and we need to feed people, and not just feed people, right?
If we feed them, they will come.
Yeah, and so that also means that it's not just families who come. We have a number of individuals who come for breakfast. We have a 7-day-a-week feeding program. Right now we serve breakfast just a couple of those days. When we move into our new building, we'll be serving meals, three hot meals a day to anyone who needs to be fed. So, we are careful. We keep soft eyes to see what's going on. Mm-hmm. We want our families to feel safe, but we also want everyone to feel welcome. And it's New York City, and we're right across the street from the World Trade Center. So this means that people come with all kinds of things going on in their hearts and in their minds and in their lives. It is something that we're really attuned to. Anyway, please.
So I'm in a church that's really suburban, and it doesn't have that people just show up because it's New York City. And it's also, we've started doing some of the things that you're talking about at your 9:15 service, where we have more kid participation, we have youth readers. I'm trying to get elementary school age readers now, and we're trying to make it gradually more family friendly and welcoming. We do it once a month. So we have this once a month, try to make it 45 minutes with one reading, and try to make it more simple music so that people can participate. We're gradually doing that. But what I wanted to ask about is the transition part. So it sounds like you had the ability to just make a new service. And in a church where it's really hard to get people to come to a new service. My church has tried that at other times, and they only get the core people. So we're trying to do it within the actual service we already have, just once a month, and help people so it has to connect in some way to what they're used to doing.
Yes, absolutely.
As well. So it can't just be a totally new thing. So I wondered if you could talk a little bit about transitioning to a shorter or more family-friendly service when you can't just make a new service.
Right. So part of the shorter is the preacher.
I'm the preacher. So
okay, so you can do that. Part of inclusion is what people see without you having to change very much at all. Can the children get close to the altar during the Eucharistic prayer? If that makes people nervous at the beginning, if there's an altar rail, they can come up just as far as the altar rail. You can work on that gradually. But when people get used to seeing children there, it becomes something they look for. And I fought this battle at All Saints Pasadena. When I got there, they had already had children standing around the altar for the Eucharistic prayer at the early service. And they were absolutely certain that everyone would object if that happened at 11. And guess what? We tried it, and the church did not fall down. And more families started coming to that 11 o'clock service because the kids were visible there and being included in that small way. You know, we have the same situation at you know, our own lovely, beautiful 11:15 service. There won't be children coming up to the altar. There aren't even adults that can come up to the altar with our marble stairs. But
Hi, I'm in a church that I've only been serving at for now almost 2 years. And the previous rector had somebody working with him voluntarily because the church can't afford all these different staff. I am the only one that's paid, and then we have a music director who's part-time. But he had someone there who had a PhD in special needs children. So I actually have a Sunday school equipped for special needs children, and we still do have some. One is severely, no, two are severely special needs, and that. But I just don't know how to include them in a main service, because I understand everything you're saying. It's great to, you know, I use all the same materials that you've just mentioned to keep kids in there. We also, you know, but it used to be a thing that they would invite some of these, some of the children who had such needs to be acolytes. Well, then a few weeks ago, one of these is sort of agitated, one of the acolytes is agitated and knocks a candle off the altar. It's like, what point? I mean, what can you do when you have varied needs? I hear that that's not what is coming out with this sounds like kids who don't have that kind of.
we have a lot of conversations about the candles and people not touching the table, but
how do you
the acolytes, so
children on spectrums and
yep,
you know.
So sometimes you can do that safely, and sometimes you have to offer something different. And there is you know, I applaud you for including kids on the spectrum as acolytes, and it may mean that acolyte needs a partner, someone who is an acolyte, an additional acolyte alongside him and shadowing him, someone he's comfortable with, who doesn't need to do anything except stand in and, you know, catch that candle when it falls, or you know, even just to make sure that he's okay once the candle has been knocked over, because candles will get knocked over. And
have you done? Whenever I think of doing things with our children, different programs that we've done, and we have quite a good number of adults who will join in with that, but nobody knows how to include the range of children. It's not including them with adults, it's
right. So the inclusion of kids with special needs is probably an entire workshop on its own. There is a wonderful model that is called Rhythms of Grace in the Episcopal Church, which is a worship for all ages and all abilities. And they have a great website. There are lots of churches around the country who are offering that special service on a weekly basis or a monthly basis, that is highly participatory for anyone. It's a bit like Messy Church in that regard, which is another great worship model that is not a typical Sunday Eucharist. We've been, but as kids should be acolyting as young as third grade if they want to be. That's not going to happen at my 11:15 service very often. It's starting to happen. It is starting to happen. I was at another church, which shall remain nameless. The acolytes at the principal service were all adults, and they did not want that taken away by the teenagers. Where, you know, so the teenagers had very limited spots available at 9 o'clock. It may mean that you gather a group in your community of, you know, a psychologist, a social worker, parents of kids with special needs, and talk through this with them. This is what we ended up doing at All Saints. We had a child with cerebral palsy who wanted to sing in the choir, and at that point, the choir was performance-based, and people auditioned for it, even the children, and they decided they needed a different kind of choir so that everyone could participate. that will require conversation. It's worth looking at the Rhythms of Grace model to see whether that might be something that you are able to bring people in the community together for. I would suggest reaching out to other churches and other, if there's a special needs school in your area, because you shouldn't be doing that on your own. You've got enough to do. And, why not make that something, especially if it's going to be once a month, where, a number of people get together and help this happen. But if it's really just about including the kids you've already got, then I think that can be solved with a conversation, maybe a couple of meetings with professionals and parents, and talk about how best to support their kids, because if they want to be in worship, that's just such a gift. So thank you for that. Can we move on and talk a little bit about what formation looks like when it's intergenerational? So we started something when Trinity 11:15 service moved over to St. Paul's. We realized we were going to overlap at the education hour, which was a really exciting thing. And so we started doing something new called whole community learning, which meant that at least once a month, instead of being in our age-segregated classes or groupings, we came together and did things as a whole community. The first year, our theme for the entire year was Jesus, Rebel with a Cause, and you're seeing a slide from that. One of our methodologies for this is to have stations set up. This is the New York County Lawyers Association. You can see those really special lawyers there on the wall. We had tables like this with activities set up. We made people sometimes come into the room with their intergenerational groups that we helped them figure out by, saying, all right, so this table is for everyone whose birthday is in February. Or, you got a wristband for your generation, and you needed to get a collection of rainbow wristbands in your group before you could come to the table. There's always food on these events. We've had a number of different ways to mix people up and get them out of their regular groupings. Because, of course, the default is always for children to stay with their parents and for the elders to stay with each other and the young adults to take over a table. But we also had table leaders, and they came from every group. This is one of our youth volunteers, Carla. Bob Scott is the director of Faith Formation and Education. He'll be here later in the week. He really was a champion of this. He read my book, and he said, there's a call out at the end of the book to doing things more intergenerationally. I really think this is what's going to change the church. And he said, so I'm pitching this to the rector and the vicar. And I was like, wow, okay. And we got the go ahead to blow up Sunday school, basically. And we don't even use the word Sunday school anymore. The classroom model is dead. There's a really good reason for that. Sunday school was not invented for Christian formation. Sunday school came into being in order to get poor kids off the street and to teach them to read and write. And it was another 100 years after that before school was compulsory. But that was their one free day of the week, Sundays, and that's why they had school on Sundays. And the classroom model.
What's the phrase you use then instead of Sunday school? It's
Our program is called Whole Community Learning. Can you go forward a slide? So this is one of our sacristans who is at a table that I think is about baptism. I'm trying to remember what's on the table there. Whole community learning is our umbrella for everything that happens at 10 o'clock. Godly play falls in that category. We typically get anywhere from 30 to 60 people at a whole community learning event. There is a facilitated parents group that continues to meet during that time. There is something called the Gospel, the New York Times, the Wall Street Journal, and You that has continued to meet. Those are small core groups, but once a month we don't have godly play. We convince everyone, come. This will be a way of getting to know each other, because that was our ultimate goal. We knew that once we moved into our new building, we needed the people who didn't know each other to be in relationship, and that only happens when you've eaten together, and when you've talked together, and when you've shared ideas together. So, Missy, I'm going to ask you to advance the slide. Oh, one more back. So, we've done things like this. We did a whole Lenten series on prayer practices. So you see we have prayer cubes on the table here for families to take home, but we also did yoga and body prayer on that same Sunday. And we have our seniors sitting in chairs because they do chair yoga every week. And so our yoga instructor is very familiar with accommodating different needs and ages. So that was really a particularly lovely thing. In the months that we were, the years we were at 14 VC, the New York County Lawyers Association, there was really only one space where the whole group could gather. Now that building has been sold, and because our new building still isn't ready for the congregation, we are meeting in St. Paul's Chapel. And the next slide, Missy, is Godly Play Large. So we've had a Godly Play program for a very long time, which we really love, and will continue to do, even under the rubric of whole community learning, because people come to us because we offer it. But our adults, unless they are Godly Play teachers, don't have a lot of experience with it. And because we're in St. Paul's Chapel, we decided to experiment with Godly Play Large for the whole congregation. So this was right after our baptism at 9:15. You can see the font in the background. We have a sand table that's used at Compline, so we were able to use that. If you know the Godly Play baptism lesson, we also have a dove kite, because the dove is a feature of the Godly Play story. So that was our large, beautiful dove. We referred to the real water in the font and the real Paschal candle, and the Godly Play storyteller moved from the Paschal candle to this smaller table where we could actually light candles for everyone. You see the children, because they're the ones closest to the sand table, but there are rings of adults. There were about 60 people at this participating. And adults I've never seen before, because they'd been at the baptism, came forward when the Godly Play storyteller invited them she said, name this child, and the person would say their own name, and she would say, remember your baptism, and they would plant their candle in the sand. It was just gorgeous. It was really a tremendous experience, and we can't wait to try Godly Play Large again. But this one was just particularly powerful, and that now Shan is changing the light and watching, so the children's eyes are focused on the light as it changes and moves through the space. So that's what you're seeing in this picture. So this was just last Sunday, Martin Luther King Day. It's a holiday weekend in New York, and we decided that we do a whole weekend of service. And we decided that at 10 o'clock hour we would focus on food insecurity. We have a brown bag program, as I mentioned, where brown bag lunches are distributed every day, and once we get into our building, we'll be able to offer hot lunch. But there was going to already be a brown bag pack on Monday for people 6th grade and up were invited to come to a poverty simulation and see what it's like to spend a month in the shoes, a month over several hours in the shoes of someone living at the poverty line in New York City. It's really a great activity and not appropriate for little ones. So families come at lunchtime. There's a community lunch for everyone who participated in the poverty simulation, and everyone who comes to the brown bag lunch program, hot lunch for that, and then they can take a brown bag with them if they so choose. But we didn't want to pack brown bags on Sunday if they were going to do that on Monday. That just didn't make sense. And since we wanted to talk about food insecurity, we know that of the 60 to 90 people who show up for a brown bag on any given day, about 30 of them have kitchens. and can cook. So we made soup mix, bean soup mix, for them to take home. And after everyone made their beans soup mixes, which were distributed that afternoon, it's a quarter cup of 8 different kinds of beans, a bouillon cube, a bay leaf, and a can of chopped tomatoes. And the recipe was in English and Chinese. Most of our brown bag clients come from Chinatown, our brown bag guests. So once people had done the activity, then we passed out snack, and some of the snack, we passed it only to groups, intergenerational groups, so we counted people off into, 1 to 5. All the 5s were here. The 5s opened their bag, and it was empty. And the 3s opened their bag, and they had 2 cheese sticks and 1 small bag of apples for their 9 people. And the 1s opened their bag, and it was full to the brim. And then they had to figure out how to share that food. And we talked about the statistics in our own city. We had a table for people to write to their local representatives. We have borough presidents in New York who are very involved at this level. People could write to their state representatives as well. And so that was really only about 35 minutes, that whole activity. And there again, it's immediately after the service. We start, since we've moved to St. Paul's for this, we start with drumming. We have a musician who brings a djembe, and that's what gathers everyone to the carpet. And people have already gone back for more coffee and more donuts, so it brings them forward again. If we have time afterward and there's still people hanging out because it's too cold to go outside, as it was on this particular day, then we can continue drumming afterwards for a while too. And we have a number of frame drums for the kids too, which we pass out or put back, depending on how much we need to control the sound level for that particular activity. So that's the kind of thing that we are focusing on for the next couple of months, because we don't know when we can move into our new building. We don't know when we'll be able to be age segregated again. So we're just taking advantage of the fact that we're all together and having a great time brainstorming. So actually, I set up something for you right over here. And it is from Adam Walker Cleveland. I think that's it. Those 3 names. We've had a tragedy in our parish family. A parent has died. Her funeral will be Saturday. She was 46. She's leaving a 6-year-old and a 10-year-old. And even though she'd been ill for a long time, most people were unaware of that because she wanted to come to church and be her children's mother and not the person who everyone was asking, "Oh, how are you?" So it's hitting us harder than it might have had we been preparing for it along the way. And so because we thought this was the weekend of the move and it's been pushed off for at least another month, we hadn't actually planned something that was specific to the day. And when we realized that this huge funeral would be taking place the day before, we thought, what a better way to reach out to our community and give us something to wrestle with in our grief than the Psalms. And Adam has this fabulous series, a devotional guide for the Psalms, but coloring posters for the Psalms. And I had imagined all of this would not take nearly as long and that you'd be able to color and all of that, but you still may, and you can take a look at these. My colleagues today at 2 o'clock will be brainstorming what we'll do that day. I already know they want to sing some Taizé paperless chants based on the Psalms. So we have that going for us. We have this, we have the coloring posters. We also will provide pieces of cardstock and the same coloring things so that people can write down a psalm that brings them comfort or gives them strength. Of course, the Psalms tell us a lot more about human nature than God's nature. There are lots of Psalms that where people are really angry with God, and of course, grief does that. And so that will be something we'll draw everyone's attention to, that God is big enough to hold us in our most extreme emotions. That's a really wonderful thing that we get from wrestling with the Psalms. It reminds me that when we have done intergenerational Bible study, we have begun with the Godly Play, an expanded version of the Godly Play lesson about the Holy Bible, because guess what? There are lots of adults in our congregations who don't understand the Bible and where these books come from and what they are meant to be, and that they were written over hundreds of years, and all of that. So having a Bible basics thing is with kids in the mix is really valuable for adults. Yes.
Yeah, one of my questions, and so I'm in a multi-clergy context. We have three. I'm in a multi-clergy context. We have 3 clergy, and we have 1 clergy person who does adult education, and I'm children and youth and families. And I'm wondering, in your context as well, like how does that contribute to the siloing, right? So like the adult education kind of develops its own programming and has its lay leaders and all of that, and then there's the children's. How do you do something where you're saying, oh, adults need to learn about this too, and children do too? Like, what is that? How do you take advantage of that structure?
Yeah.
Move through the disadvantages of it. I'm curious, in a larger church, multi-clergy congregation with those 2 distinct roles, how do you make sure the education isn't so distinct?
Well, we're lucky that we have a team that's faith formation education, and we're all lay people. Kathy Bazzuti Jones has an interfaith ordination, but we're actually one of the very few teams at Trinity who doesn't have a clergy person in charge. So priests get hired thinking they're going to do all this great stuff, and then they need to work with us if they want to get it done. So with that model was set up for us. But we are really, really intentional. We've got a whole community learning team of parishioners who brainstorm about these things. We don't meet as often now as we did at the beginning. We had to meet often before because we were launching something that no one could imagine. But now we do it periodically, and we plan for a longer season. And one of the big pieces is inviting people in. So inviting the clergy person who loves to teach about the book of Genesis, for example. Inviting the person on our staff who's responsible for our justice and reconciliation ministries to help us reach the people in the community who can do this teaching piece that we need for a certain subject. So we've gotten really, really intentional about collaborating across departments as well, and certainly for our larger pieces, that's something that's just sort of in the DNA. Missy, would you advance the slide? So, of course, there are a number of other opportunities for bringing the entire community together. We burn the palms on after Mardi Gras, and that's a fun thing for everyone, but we burn them not at the end, because guess what? The children will have gone home and gone to bed by then. This is a party with a lot of dancing, and we just put the kibosh on the drinking. It was important to do that. But the party goes quite late, and so we burn the palms when we have a critical mass of kids early in the evening so that they can participate. And the next slide is Palm Sunday. Trinity also has donkeys, the retreat center. So it's kind of a magical thing to have a donkey in New York City. And there again, we've made the donkey isn't just for the procession. The donkey's there all morning because people want to be with the donkey. Adults want to be with the donkey. Everyone wants to be with the donkey. You can't just, have it for that 15-minute procession and then, not have access to the donkey. So we're learning other things about how to be really inclusive. Donkeys in the churchyard for hours. We periodically gather everyone to make cards for pastoral care. So these are the cards that go to people who are sick, who are celebrating birthdays, who have lost a loved one, who are celebrating the birth of a child, any occasion. And there again, it's an activity that everyone participates in. We use a variety of media, but this is one of our favorites, liquid watercolors. Next one. We had a retreat which was families and our seniors group, the New Beginnings, and they weren't sure how they were going to like that, the seniors. They liked it so much that we were doing it every year on Columbus Day weekend. There are a lot of things we can do together. Tai Chi and yoga we can do together. There are a variety of crafts we can do together. We have our meals together. We have our worship together. They're getting to participate in, they go to the 11:15 service. Some of them don't darken the door of St. Paul's at 9:15, but they're seeing what liturgy can look like when everyone is a piece of it and a part of it. We are also really intentional about doing our mission trips and pilgrimages intergenerationally. This is 30 people ranging in age from 6 to 60 who went to Standing Rock. And that is something that we can do because we have the resources to do it, but it's also something we could do with ages 6 to 60 because we were really intentional about planning and including all ages and making sure that what we offered, both in terms of the level of energy and the difficulty in walking and what we were offering to teach about cross-cultural contexts, was accessible to each age category. Next slide. Environmental justice has been another great place for us to bring all ages together. So this is the Riverkeepers Sweep on the Hudson River, which happens every year, and we have all ages, ranging in age from preschool to seniors who participate in this event. This led us to plan very frequent environmental justice themed activities. Next slide. And this is what it culminated in. One of our teenagers is one of the conveners in New York City of the youth climate change movement. And when the climate strike happened, she asked if St. Paul's could open its doors to the local schools. And there you see it. It really, you can see from the photo, truly intergenerational, but totally led by the youth. Our fabulous new priest for youth and family is here. His name is Matt Welsh. You should absolutely meet him. He can tell you more about what intergenerational looks like with teenagers. It is particularly important for teenagers to have these relationships. It's harder work. If you didn't start out in this context, but it's completely worth it. Yes?
I just want to back up and confirm kind of how you do your catechesis on your non-intergenerational Sunday. So you mentioned that you have godly play, and that's for ages, how high do you go?
Well, when we move into our new building, it'll go through third grade, preschool to third grade.
Okay, so that's a combined preschool to third grade experience of godly play?
In several different rooms, but
Okay.
yes.
All right, so that's a big. And then what do you do with middle school and teens?
So middle school and teens, since Matt came on board, are going out for coffee most weeks. Well, we don't have a space yet. And what happened this last week on Martin Luther King Day is they stayed for the activity before they went out for coffee. The other thing we did which you didn't see, was that we made cards for the family of Charlita. So, some of the teenagers have obviously known this family for a very long time. So they stayed and made cards and made soup mix before they departed. When we did a session on the climate strike prior to it, that was led by teens, and so Matt facilitated that and helped Azalea, create a platform and knew the questions that would bring out the best stories for her and her partner from outside our church to tell. And we brought the kids fourth grade and up to hear the teenagers, and obviously the adults came too. So once a month, everyone's together. The rest of the month, sometimes it depends. Sometimes the adults and teenagers are doing something together. Sometimes the adults and the younger children will pair up for something. For instance, when we made it was the 100th anniversary of World War I, and so the children taught the adults how to make the crepe paper poppies, the red poppies, which was really lovely, and they all learned about the Christmas Day truce. So everyone had a conversation about that. There are a number of different ways that we've been able to bring people together. We're having our adults annotate the Bibles that we give out. So we're having them earmark their favorite passages, write it on a sticky note, write a note to the child who's getting this Bible. We're asking grandparents and parents to highlight the passages that were read at their wedding, or a passage that's particular to them. I think we're out of time, people. I think we've gone past our time. It's been really great talking with you. Happy for you to be in touch with any other questions or ideas, because I feel like I didn't get enough of your ideas. I'm sorry you didn't get to color.
Get to help you with your.
I know. Well, I think my team's actually in really good shape. I got several text messages last night after I pitched the idea of the Psalms, because I was here and I was like, "Oh, this is right here. We can do this." And everyone went, "Yes, yes." But the Tizay idea came from Bob Scott. He's like, "Oh, we can do that. We don't even need to ask someone from the choir to show up. We can do that." So.
You want these back?
No, these are for you. Take them. They're yours.